Hey, we're here at the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Hey, another hurricane story from Hurricane Harvey. With me is President of the University of Houston downtown, Juan Munoz. President Munoz, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking a little bit about the hurricane first. Tell me your hurricane story. Where were you as it hit, and how did you talk about your leadership here at the university?
Right. Well, I appreciate that. It was an event that none of us will ever forget. Most of the time, once school let out, and fortunately many of us were at our homes riding out the storm.
Yeah.
And I had personally never seen volumes of water at that level.
Few people have, right?
And, that's right. And so. I live just north of downtown in an area called the Heights, and it fortunately lived up to its name and reputation during the storm. But on that one, I believe it was a Saturday morning when I woke up, and I did not appreciate how much rain was falling. And all of the culverts had overflown, and the back of both of my vehicles, which are both large four-wheel drives coming down, having brought them from West Texas, both of the rear ends were almost underwater.
Wow.
And so there was it seemed about 2.5 feet of water in our street. And then it became very, very real what was transpiring in the magnitude of the storm and the accumulations of water where I lived and across the city. And then, of course, as we began to watch the news, it was heartbreaking what was happening across the city.
And of course, the water levels near the university were very, very high. Did you make it into the university at some
yes,
point?
Yes. There were several occasions where I attempted to reach the university, but in that Saturday and Sunday morning, at the sort of the height of the water levels, the university was inaccessible. It was almost 360 degrees circled by high the depth of water. We had water enter the lowest levels of the campus, the highest levels that they'd ever reached, about 4 feet above, about 3 or 4 feet above Allison levels. And but as immediately upon once the water had subsided to some extent, then I came to the campus and I checked in on our staff, particularly our security personnel, our law enforcement, and then shortly thereafter, immediately thereafter, we had people on site, support staff, a lot of facility staff to assess the damage, as well as our IT staff, because we had some issues with our Blackboard and some of our services. As you might recall, we were trying to send messages, and then we had to migrate. We had to migrate our some of our communication capability to the Shea, what is the business building, and of course worry about commerce. Once CenterPoint Energy Power was no longer energizing the one main building, we had automatic redundancy systems with generators. But once the diesel fuel on those generators expired, then we were going to face an even greater problem.
Did you ever lose power at all?
Yes, there was short periods of time when we did lose power, and so the challenge was bringing additional diesel to the buildings to run the generators if you still had very high water levels that would, could render.
Were the generators down low as well, closer to the water?
Here on our campus, here in the one main building, that is where we have most of our machinery, because as you might know, this is the oldest part of the campus, and the building was opened in April 1929. So nobody ever, I think, imagined water levels getting to that height. Now, having said that, they had created some sort of preventative protective measures after Allison that did make a difference, but we had to quickly replace a great deal of parts. A lot of the what are called the chillers that drive the air in the buildings were damaged and had to be replaced.
When you think about everyone was in crisis mode. Every organization in town that we seem to all be working on this. Did you find that your leadership style changed as you dealt with others because you were in this sort of bigger crisis?
No. I think in these situations, Bob, as I suspect you think, you have to. when you're in these positions of responsibility and leadership, you need to project confidence and strength.
Yeah.
And when all around you is falling, right? The famous Kipling poem, "If," you have to be strong and firm and have vision. And the one thing I was very confident of is, number one, the technical proficiency of our staff and our vice presidents and our directors, because really, truly, many of them had already gone through something similar, Allison. And so I took a great deal of confidence, and a lot of my decisions were based on the judgment and opinions and recommendations of those who had gone through Allison. So if you're in this sort of role that I was in as president, after a short period of time, and you had people that had already overcome a storm, a similar storm, less magnitude, Allison, then their insights proved to be very, very thoughtful and helpful, but that's how I would have behaved under any crisis now and in the future, relying on the team that you have around you.
Yeah, when you began to hear how some of the staff and certainly a lot of the students, how they were impacted by the storm, adversely impacted by the storm, how did you react to that? I mean, I know for me it was hard to start hearing when, especially staff that you knew, when they lost their home. I mean, how did it impact you?
Well, I mean, obviously you're very emotionally impacted, but you need to exercise, very rational decisions. And one of the things that I did very quickly is I asked the provost to remain in contact with all of the deans, to remain in contact with the faculty, and to make sure that we were hearing about our people that were particularly adversely affected. There's a difference between losing your home and losing a car.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted to know if there were cases of displaced families, displaced colleagues very quickly, and I wanted to know what we could do very quickly to assist them. I wanted to make sure that students understood that we were going to be flexible and sensitive and thoughtful and patient and humane, given the magnitude of the adversity that they were facing, and not just they individually. There's a difference when you're 18, 19, 24, and when you're the family of 3 and have lost everything, right? So not just what they were maybe individually facing, but what their family collectively and their extended families, okay, what they were facing and having to grapple with. So I wanted to know about that very quickly. But all of us in the leadership, all of us in the cabinet, the president, the provost, the vice presidents, of all of the different areas, were equally concerned with knowing the situations of their staff and colleagues and friends. Because when you're at UHD, we're not a small campus. But we're a sufficient size. But most people know each other here, and so you hear about the people that are in particularly dire straits.
What are the numbers of staff, faculty that lost their homes, and numbers of students? Do we know?
Well, I know the number that we provided some degree of support for, and it was just under 400. So we had I don't know the exact number, maybe 24 faculty and staff that were very severely impacted. I know of a former colleague who was a very high-ranking administrator at UHD for many years, and she lost her home. I know of a librarian that had, but these were people that maybe had 3-4 feet of water in their home, and so you don't quite know whether it's a total loss or they're going through the process of remediation for their first floor. But we had several hundred students. We had about 160 that did not return, and based that decision to the extent that we're aware of it on Harvey. We're actually going to make special provisions and some incentive dollars for the spring for them to be contacted and see if we can incentivize them to come back in the spring, and maybe a small scholarship or something. The problem is, or the challenge for students, is that the faculty and staff know that they have a secure employment here. But for the students, we know that if you stay out a semester or 2 semesters, you significantly increase the likelihood that you won't return or graduate from UHD. So we've got to be very proactive in getting those students re-engaged.
Finally, briefly, any leadership lessons learned from this crisis?
Right. You need to be patient. You need to be surrounded by people that you trust. You need to listen to the people that you trust. You need to not exaggerate the dilemma and work the problem, and not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. You do what's necessary, then you do what's possible, and soon you find yourself achieving the impossible. And when you're looking at 20 feet of water on your campus, right, surrounding your campus, it seems impossible, right? I would have liked to just, and parted the waters, but that was impossible. So you start setting up for, what do you do when the water recedes?
Parting the waters is not in your wheelhouse.
No, not yet. Yeah. And so you want to work what you know is going to happen, which is, once the water recedes, what do we do? Line up our contractors, line up our vendors, line up materials. Are we going to have any issues with communication? What do we communicate to the faculty, staff, students, and external community? How do we work with Centerpoint? Do we have any issues with the elevators, etc.? Yeah. So you start lining that up. So as soon as you're able to act, you do.
Wow. President Juan Munoz, hurricane story. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Another hurricane story from Houston.